You're listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This podcast is sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. It's not about the destination. It's about going someplace you never thought possible. Go to imaginenext.ingrammicro.com to find out more. Let's get into it.
Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. I'm your host, Keri Roberts, and my guest today is Ryan Freese, a technology consultant at Ingram Micro. Welcome to the show, Ryan. So thrilled to have you back here again today with us.
Hi, Keri. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
So Ryan, last time you were on, we chatted about remote access security, and today we're following up that conversation talking about business continuity with Citrix networking. And one of your partner's clients with more than 14,000 students unable to travel to Australia from China due to imposed travel bans, the University of Sydney turned to Citrix for help. Can you tell us a little bit about this example or others and how Citrix was able to help?
Yeah, I think the University of Sydney is a great example of how both resiliency as well as technology can really overcome a lot of out-of-control circumstances, especially in the business world. Just to set the stage for everyone that's listening, the University of Sydney, they're a huge institution in Australia. They actually have over 80,000 combined students and staff who are actually based in 22 different locations, including campuses, education hospitals, etc. And if we really look at what Australia faced alone in 2019 as well as 2020, they've really had to overcome a lot of major events. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with watching the news and hearing about the bushfires that have been going on in Australia, the flooding, and of course, the current events we're all facing. But despite all of this, the team at University of Sydney, they were really determined to give students as well as staff a high quality user experience. Of course, they started with the students first because that's what makes up the university. So they partnered with Citrix and built a Citrix environment directly in the cloud, which for all of you who are familiar with the cloud, this just inherently makes the solution overall more scalable so they can scale up and down depending on the need. And the best part of this is it only took 7 days for the entire implementation. So that's some pretty amazing turnaround time. As an overall part of this implementation, the University of Sydney, they're able to provide over 100 course-specific applications, as well as SaaS-based, so web apps, that students really can access from anywhere, any device, any time they want. They even took it a step further and made student decision maker ranking system. So in the case of an emergency, employees don't really have to worry about or wonder who has the responsibility or even the authority to make an overall decision. The organization should be able to address all business continuity tasks really in every location in which they operate. So if they're across the globe, they probably need to have some sort of team structure in each of those locations. The next is all about planning. So at a high level, a business continuity plan should identify potential business disruptions that can affect any of an organization's locations. So we're looking at things like power outages, pandemics, epidemics, fires, and also those that are specific to each individual location. So for example, I live in sunny South Florida, so we have to worry about hurricanes. So we need some sort of plan around that. And planning extends throughout the supply chain as well, including reviewing the actual strategies in place for key vendors, identifying potential risks of operational outages, and also evaluating what are the alternatives that are out there should something go wrong. To keep a number of these scenarios manageable, planning should also be based on a worst case scenario. Also, I personally seen this a ton, but it isn't always possible to maintain normal operations in an emergency situation. Organizations really need to account for mitigating the impact of reduced capacity by going in, identifying which operations are most essential, what applications are most critical, who will perform these operations, and how will work be overall redirected. Then there's, of course, disaster recovery and testing. Best practices call for annual updates of a business continuity plan to reflect changes, both in the criticality as well as the dependency of applications, business priorities, risk management, locations, operations, as well as some other considerations. Full emergency simulations should be conducted at least annually as well, so at least once a year. And these guidelines, along with an annual review of all the plans as well as communication testing, should at minimum be the guideline, the baseline for most organizations out there. And then the last two, they're the ones that are probably most overlooked, especially by IT professionals, but definitely not from an overall business perspective. And this is all about communication, employee safety. And I will say that as an Ingram Micro employee, I'd say they did a specifically great job when it came to communication as well as employee safety. They regularly announced email updates of what was going on in our physical locations. Me as a remote employee, I had full awareness of what was happening in our warehouses, because we have really warehouses across the nation as well as the globe. And I'm sure Citrix did the same for their employees as well, since I know this is very top in mind of what they do as a business. But the big thing here is really ensuring about keeping people safe and making sure that this is top priority and having a plan in place for emergency communications to employees, contractors, clients, vendors, you name it.
Is there a certain time that an organization should be doing a business continuity plan? Like, is it when they hit a certain size? Should they be doing it? Obviously, I'm sure people are thinking about it now, but when is the best time that people should really be considering this should be done?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's any specific size. I'd say it depends on the type of vertical the business is and the criticality of potentially losing services should some sort of disaster or failover occur. So I think the idea of having some sort of plan in place is going to be organization-wide. Like every organization should look at it, because there's potential revenue loss if you don't have a backup plan for really anything failing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I know Citrix also has a business continuity planning checklist they recommend. What's included on that?
Yeah, and one thing I want to preface is Citrix has done a fantastic job providing resources, both the partners as well as customers, when it comes to this idea of business continuity. Because again, this has really changed over the last couple of months. And as employees are really adjusting to this idea of a new normal, and we shift focus to more of the networking side of the house, specifically talking around Citrix ADC, which a lot of you listening probably know them more as NetScaler. So they renamed NetScaler to Citrix ADC. They've provided a great checklist of things to look out for the networking side of the house. And the first is really to identify any single point of failure for server connectivity. So I kind of hinted at this before when we talked about Amazon, but everyone understands, especially every IT professional, understands that a server can fail or experience performance problems really at any time. But if there isn't a backup plan, this can cause huge issues to employees, or even worse, to customers that are using these services. So again, going back to that Amazon example, or if any of you are familiar or have any loved ones that had to apply for unemployment and they couldn't hit the unemployment website, well, that's because those weren't accounting for the amount of load that was coming in. So it's critical to use some sort of solution in place, like Citrix's ADC appliance, which really at its core can regularly check the health of servers. And if anything fails, they could actually load balance connections to a server that's fully running to ensure that, again, users don't see any sort of downtime or connection error when going to that server. The next is really about having a way to check for any application and performance issues as well. So very similar to checking for servers. Now we're going a little bit deeper and checking applications as well as their performance, and even potentially enhance the performance of these applications. It can be incredibly helpful to have some sort of solution in place that can monitor the health of specific services within an application. So take a web app as an example, maybe monitoring the IIS server on that web application. And of course, if anything does fail, just like with a server, have a way to send traffic to use a different server that is fully running. Also, at Ingram Micro, we're really seeing a huge increase in demand for disaster recovery solutions as, again, customers are reviewing and re-looking at their business continuity plans. So customers are very aware data centers can also fail or suffer performance issues as well. So they're also looking for a way to monitor the health of their entire data center and fail over to a secondary site if needed. And personally, I'm often seeing that secondary site that they're looking to fail over to is living in some sort of public cloud environment like Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS, because it really is a cost-efficient way for organizations to keep everything powered off and only have to pay for the utilization of that failover when it actually occurs. And then arguably the most important right now is to check your network and internet services. For example, ask yourself, are your customers all coming in through a VPN? If so, what's the throughput limit on that VPN? So if we look at the world of a VPN, they've always been traditionally designed to handle a subset of users connecting in remotely. But now, of course, everyone is connecting remotely just due to what we're facing today. So simple things like checking your VPN or firewall throughput is of critical importance. Also, even though your branches might have fast connectivity, what about an employee's home? It's very possible some employees are using some sort of broadband connection or maybe even 3G. And there are a lot of tools out there, like, again, Citrix's ADC, that offer optimization techniques that can improve overall application delivery across these type of networks, the ones that have potential poor network connectivity. And then lastly, I've been seeing this one all the time, but for existing Citrix customers, really just check your ADC high availability. As a technology advisor, I always recommend deploying Citrix ADC as an HA pair, a high availability pair. But even if your ADC is already an HA pair, it's essential to test failover periodically in case anything goes out of sync. Also, for the more security conscious customer that's out there, I like to take this a step farther and recommend a Citrix ADC pair for both external traffic as well as an HA pair to handle internal traffic. This will just overall make their environment more secure, as the only port the customer will actually need to open externally is 443 for gateway traffic. While, of course, those internal ADCs will handle all of the internal server load balancing for continuity.
Real quick, before we jump straight back into the episode today, we want to tell you about Ingram Micro Financial Solutions and how you can maximize your buying power and get to yes with your customers faster. For the last 9 years, Ingram Micro has been Channel Pro's reader's choice for best financing options. Put the power of our credit and leasing options to work for you. You can easily contact Financial Solutions at ingrammicro.com. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, and Citrix has a really nice kind of visual checklist on the website, which we can link in the show notes as well. And I recommend people listening to look at that and then re-listen to what Ryan said, because you really gave some nice detail through that checklist for people to really understand how they can kind of help their own organization. Will users ever have an issue with bandwidth with a continuity plan? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think this really goes back to what I mentioned just a handful of seconds ago. Of course, the answer is absolutely yes. If we look at the perspective of the employee, especially now that a lot of employees are connecting from home, there can definitely be challenges right off the bat with an employee's at-home internet service provider. Most of us are not unfamiliar with our internet service dropping for minutes or even hours at a time for no apparent reason. But from personal experience, it can be especially frustrating when your internet drops in the middle of an important business call, or maybe while you're working on some sort of web-based or even virtualized application that you have to be on the internet to access. And really, your only option right now is to call back in and conference the call from your phone, or maybe turn on your phone's hotspot and try to connect that way. So this is definitely a concern, I think, both for the employee as well as the employer, because if the user can't connect in, if the employee can't connect in, that means they're being unproductive. And there are some solutions out there that can help out with this for employees that are especially critical for the organization. Going back, of course, to the Citrix example, they just came out with something called an SD-WAN 110 appliance, which is a small appliance made for at-home or small branch offices that can leverage the employee's at-home internet service provider network. So let's take Comcast as an example, as well as 4G for high availability. So essentially, if the employee's Comcast network goes out, which never happens, right? Happens all the time. This appliance can leverage some sort of backup 4G line so the user doesn't experience a drop in connectivity. It's definitely a little bit of a costly solution, as you have to have some sort of 4G backup line and you're paying for the usage of that line. But it's a great solution for ensuring overall uninterrupted connectivity. And then if we flip things over to the employer perspective, I think I hit upon this already when we talked about the VPN and firewall concerns. But to re-emphasize this again, there are definitely concerns from a throughput perspective as more and more employees are connecting externally into the network. So again, definitely check your throughput usage on your VPN, check your throughput of your firewall or even your gateway appliance to ensure you're not bottlenecking any connections that are coming in remotely.
Do you have a suggestion for employees that are working at home for a way to test kind of their bandwidth to know where they're at? And is there anything that they could do with their own provider or at home? Or is this something that definitely the organization would have to provide, as you're kind of mentioning here?
Yeah, that's a hard one. So you can definitely, if you just go to Google and search, like, what is my internet speed? There's a lot of tests on there that'll show you your download speed, your upload speed, your overall throughput. So you can check exactly what you're getting. So let's say you're paying for 50 megs and you're only seeing 20 there. Well, I'd go ahead and call up my internet service provider and be like, hey, what's going on? I'm paying for 50. Why am I being bottlenecked on just 20 megs? Another thing I would often suggest is if you're connected to a wireless Wi-Fi, so wireless connectivity, and you're not seeing the speeds you're hoping for, if you have a device that you can connect directly via an Ethernet cable, you're going to get better speed just in general. And then lastly, you can always call up your internet service provider, give them a call and say like, hey, do you have any promotions going on? I'm working from home now. I need additional throughput just so my speed's faster. So I'd say it's definitely more on the employee side, but who knows, maybe some of these employees work for a fantastic employer that's willing to comp some of their internet costs.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. What is a good bandwidth to have when you're at home? What is the number?
It depends on how you're working, right? So if you're utilizing very graphical applications that's presented to you from some sort of web page, you're going to, of course, need additional throughput. I know me personally, I use 50 megs, but a lot of my colleagues are kind of laughing at that and said, like, I can't believe you're not using at least 100. But I work overall fine on 50. My parents, as an example, they use around 25, but they just use regular web browsing, office applications, and that's sufficient for them. So I'd say that's probably around the sweet spot of what we're seeing, anywhere from 25 to 100. But again, it depends on what you're doing on a day-to-day.
Now, what are some of the Citrix products that you suggest would be great for everything we're talking about today?
Yeah, there's no doubt if we talk about from the virtualization and cloud side of the house, Citrix virtual apps and desktops, as well as the different Citrix cloud services, have been really a huge help for customers with their business continuity needs. Going back to the University of Sydney, they're able to leverage these solutions and do an implementation in under a week to get all of their students as well as staff up and running. But for the sake of today's topic around networking, it's Citrix ADC all the way. And often paired with Citrix ADM, which we haven't touched upon at all yet, which is their application delivery management solution. This is very helpful in multiple cases. The solutions were really built with business continuity in mind. So just to name a few features without going too deep, if we look at Citrix ADC, it has a gateway component that's all about providing secure remote access to internal resources like a web application. So rather than users hitting an internal application directly, they're going to instead be directed to some sort of company branded gateway page where they'll be asked to log in with their username, their password, and we can even take it a step further and ask them for a second factor of authentication for added security before giving them access to that web application, which, by the way, I would recommend all the way from a security perspective. If you have users connecting in remotely, definitely think about adding a secondary factor of authentication, like a one-time password on their phone, because that's the number one way most organizations get compromised is from a stolen password. Of course, earlier we talked about how Citrix ADC also provides load balancing for servers, as well as applications, as well as data center level load balancing as well. It can even be configured to monitor specific services that are running on these servers. Again, use this example earlier, such as if we look at a web server, if IIS, if you know anything about web servers, that's needed in order for that to run, is running on that web server or not. And then, of course, I mentioned Citrix ADM. If we pair Citrix Application Delivery Management and that appliance with an ADC, we can leverage and give organizations even additional management capabilities by providing visibility across multiple ADC appliances and automating jobs to multiple ADCs at once. Also, Citrix ADM has some amazing analytic capabilities, which I know is extremely valuable to a lot of organizations out there because it can collect a lot of detailed information about web apps, virtual desktop traffic, such as security events, user session information, web performance data, really you name it. And that's just an extremely quick, super high level overview of all the solutions capabilities. So I definitely recommend testing these out if any of these sound interesting to understand the full capabilities of these appliances.
Now, the one question we ask all of our guests on this show is, where do you see technology going within the next year? And although we asked you last time you were here, where do you see it going within this concept of business continuity?
Yeah, hopefully I'm not too far off with how I answered this last time, but I think business continuity planning is going to continue to be a top priority for organizations in 2020 as well as beyond. Now that most organizations have some solution in place for users connecting in remotely, they're going to continue to fine-tune those solutions and maybe even add more complementary solutions on top of them to improve things like performance, enhance overall security, ensure additional availability for, again, that business continuity strategy. But one thing's for sure, and it'll definitely be really interesting to see what the future holds for both businesses as well as technology in general.
And you have shared so much information with us today in a really nice detailed form. If you've listened, I encourage you to go back and take some notes to what Ryan said today. And part of what you do, Ryan, you're a technology consultant. So this is part of your job, right? To educate, to kind of help people find the right tools and services of what they need, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if people want to connect with you, they are either excited and they want to know more, or maybe they're confused of where they need to go on this topic. Where can they do that and connect with you to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, everyone can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. Also, always readily available. You can reach out to me via email. I'd be more than happy to have a deeper conversation with anyone who is interested or anyone who wants to know more information on any of the solutions we talked about today, or even just business continuity in general. I also have a couple colleagues, should I either be unavailable or maybe you want to have a more sales/marketing conversation, especially around Citrix's solutions. And my two counterparts are Cindy Carnes and Madison Darling. So both great resources to reach out to as well. They're both extremely knowledgeable when it comes to Citrix and would be more than happy to help out anyone who's listening today.
And all of that information will be in the show notes, so you can get those links as well. Thank you again so much, Ryan, for sharing a really nice, detailed conversation of what people can do within this topic. We appreciate you and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me again.
If you like this episode or have a question, join the discussion on Twitter at Ingram Texel with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, hosted by Keri Roberts. This episode was sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production with Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform.